Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Reading Online Sport Economics Seminar, our 36th. We've been meeting now since early in 2020 in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had lots and lots of really fascinating presentations over that time. We've been meeting in the midst of a pandemic, of course, which means that things are a little bit unusual, a bit chaotic, and things don't necessarily work out as planned. And so, as you'll have seen, a slight change in the schedule this week, and I'll be presenting rather than the previously advertised speakers. And I'll get onto that in a little while. I'll be chairing my own talk, but I will try and keep to time. And obviously, you'll all be able to vote with your feet in a little while. One of the things I wanted to do was firstly just share my screen to not to my slides, but to the call for papers. So we plan to run into the new year, and so we've got a call for papers. So this is a Google form which you can fill in. Simply fill in your name, affiliation, position title should you have one, not a required field, your paper title and abstract, and if you have a working paper, please do stick that in and submit. We'd be delighted to get your submissions. We've got a few already lined up for the new year. It's been a great privilege to be able to host this over the pandemic period. It's certainly, as I've said, it's been a highlight to my week every week. Consuming research. I've also been fortunate enough to present some of my research and get some excellent feedback as well. I've just put the link to the call for papers in the chat, and I will again circulate that around in the next few days. If you do know folk keen to present, and if you want to present yourself, please do. You'll note if you look at the YouTube videos for all the previous talks that this is the third time I've given a talk. So there's no requirement that you only ever present once. Bernd Frick has presented twice, Stefan Szymanski has presented twice, Alex Farnell has presented twice as well. There's no bar in terms of the number of presentations. Alex is a PhD student, and that's been a particularly great aspect of this, giving PhD students in a particularly tough time for PhD students an opportunity for networking and presenting results. And so if you are a PhD student, please do chat with me. If you have PhD students you think are ready to present, again, do encourage them to sign up and present. So that's what I want to say in terms of introduction. So obviously I'm now going to share my slides and move towards my talk. So I need to find my slides. And so here is my paper, and if this isn't visible in any sense, please do somebody let me know. I'm going into my full screen, so I can't actually see anything to do with the chat. So once I wrap things up, and I promise not to take too long, I will then invite questions, but also check the chat for anything that's happening. This is the paper's title, Reviewing the Video Assistant Referee, or VAR, as it's commonly known. Well, this is work with Rob Simmons. Rob can be here for the first half an hour, I'm pleased to say, because therefore he can answer any really tough questions that you want to put in the chat window in that time. So say joint work with Rob, who is here, and Giuseppe Migali, who I don't think is here, but if he is, that's fantastic. And it's work that's been ongoing for a little while, but it still remains in progress, despite the fact we've been going for a little while now. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. I don't mind if people want to interrupt me with questions. If you can keep yourself muted and whilst the talk's taking place, that's how we usually organise things. There'll be time for Q&A at the end. So what is the purpose of the talk? Well, it's to think about this thing called Video Assistant Referee, or VAR, not vector autoregression, not value at risk, all the other uses of VAR that we have in the economics and finance field. The VAR is technology that was introduced to assist in refereeing decisions in football. to check in the language for clear and obvious errors and serious missed incidents. Now, whenever VAR is discussed in public, a lot of the complaints are that these were not necessarily clear and obvious errors or serious missed incidents that were called up. So many of the controversies appear to relate to the finest of margins in terms of an offside, but also quite decisions on which technology can't necessarily give the final answer. So those of you familiar with football will know about the offside rule, but those not. The offside rule is at least a rule where you can see along the line whether a player has breached that line and therefore is offside. Even if the margin is fine, it's still indisputable that somebody was ahead of the line and therefore offside. Whereas fouls and other incidents tend to be much more contentious. And as a result, it's not clear that there are necessarily clear and obvious errors. And there have been examples of VAR used for what, when I've looked at things, they've appeared clear and obvious errors to me, but then they've not been overturned by VAR. So there's always a lot of grey area. One thing's clear, though, of course, is that VAR has had an impact. It's had an impact on our discourse, and it's had an impact, we imagine, on the game as well. There have been rule changes since VAR was introduced in order to tighten up issues associated with handball. Now, as I said, the aim was to improve decision making, to remove these obvious errors and incidents that were missed because there was previously simply a referee on the field with two assistants either side of the field and a fourth official on the sidelines. And of course, the human error is possible. People can be looking in the wrong direction at the wrong time, and so on. So the aim would appear to have been to improve decision making. But of course, there could well have been other objectives, not necessarily announced, or not necessarily considered either as objectives, but potential areas that are affected by something like video assistant referee, which is a technological advancement in how various people go about their workplace activity. So we may find that player behaviour is different. So players may be less able to indulge in acts of sabotage and things that are against the rules, because now there's much less chance that they can get away with it. In the past, perhaps they can take the chance that the referee couldn't see them, but now the video sees them, and so certain kinds of behaviour perhaps are fewer. It was perhaps hoped that one of those would be simulation, where players try and dive to win decisions, and hopefully that might be reduced because, well, now you can see on a video whether or not somebody actually did take a dive or not. There may be other in-match outcomes that are different. It may well be that that VAR encourages more attacking play, perhaps, or maybe it encourages more defensive play. There have been classic examples in the past of rule changes that have had unintended consequences. One that springs to mind is when 3 points for a win was introduced. Prior to this, a team that won a match would get 2 points, but then once this rule was changed, they got 3 points for the win. The idea being, well, maybe that would encourage attacking play. But of course, equally, it encourages defensive play as well, because once you're in the lead, you've got more to defend. You lose more if you lose that lead. And so a famous study, authors don't spring to mind immediately, found that indeed there was as much sabotage as there was increased attacking play as a result of that rule change. So there may be different in-match outcomes that we may or may not expect. And finally, we need to, of course, think about the fan experience. To what extent is the fan on board with this? Of course, the answer appears to be not much. Most people, when they talk about VAR, don't appear to be particularly happy about it, which suggests certain issues with the implementation, because equally fans for a long time have been calling for more intervention, because one of the many discussion points has always been over the years decisions that have gone wrong, decisions that didn't go the right way, and therefore certain outcomes were changed as a result. And just to finally finish, in terms of introducing the idea, the study, it is in some respects in the more broader field of economics, it's an opportunity to study monitoring technology that monitors how players behave, how referees make decisions, And this is fairly infrequent to the extent that we get more data involved in sport. I'm always a little bit cautious of using this argument because while, yes, we perhaps have more information on footballers than we have on checkout attendance, what we always end up doing is requiring more data. And a lot of the study of this paper has been marshalling and putting data into the right format such that we can try and start to say things about VAR. And then we end up with too much data in some respects, and conclusions are quite hard to draw. But we'll show you some of the numbers in a little while. So essentially, we're asking, well, we're trying to evaluate this technological development in football. We're trying to identify the impact on referee decisions that we can measure and identify, and we're going to try and identify the impact on other outcomes, other measured outcomes in football matches. So a bit more context. VAR has been introduced over the last 4 or 5 years. It's been introduced first in MLS in the US as a trial, and then in Australia. It was used at the World Cup in Russia, and it was rolled out in various European leagues. I've got the dates in a further slide. In different points, England was the last, and I think it was Italy and Germany who were the first, followed by Spain and France. But different years when they were implemented. And there's also differences in how it's been implemented as well, because there's obviously there's now a video, so someone's watching the video, and that person's watching the video either as it's been implemented in a van essentially outside a stadium, or they've been in some kind of central operating room distant from the stadium. We're thinking about human judgments. We're thinking about referees making decisions. And if we are, then we're probably well aware of results on social pressure with regard referees, where referees have awarded more injury time to home teams that are losing, argued as a result of social pressure. This happens more if there are more fans in the stadium. And also there's been a whole swathe of studies this year looking at the impact of having no fans on refereeing decisions as well. Equally, referees are time pressured as well. In the heat of the moment, they've got time pressure to make a very quick, snap decision on something. VAR, to some extent, reduces that social pressure. Perhaps it reduces it even more the more distant the team is that operates VAR from the stadium. But it certainly reduces it because they're not now in the stadium in the heat of the moment. And also the game has stopped as well. There's a VAR review and the game has stopped. So there's a little bit more time in which to get the decision right. So that's in terms of differences in implementation in terms of timing, and differences in the way in which VAR has been implemented give us potentially interesting variation to consider. The way the system works is that 4 types of decisions can be reviewed. So there's goals. If a goal is scored, there'll be a review. If a penalty is awarded, there'll be a review. Or even if a penalty isn't awarded by the referee on the field, there'll then be a review and it may be called back. Direct red cards, and mistaken identity in yellow and red cards are the 4 types of decisions that can be reviewed. And even if there's no actual review, so there's a distinction to be made between the check and the review. So in any given football match, there'll be penalty calls, penalty shouts. There'll be claims that this ought to have been a red card or this ought to have been something different. And so what the VAR team will be doing is checking all of these decisions. But if there's no mistake making, then there's not going to be any action taken. Okay, but if there is a possible mistake, at that point, the VAR team will contact the referee on the field via comms, and then 3 things can happen. Either the decision can be immediately overturned, that penalty that was awarded can be overturned, and game and play continues. That goal that was awarded could be disallowed, or the referee can be suggested, or the referee can decide to take a look himself or herself via the screens that are usually by the side of the field. So a referee can walk off the field and have a look at the TV screen and look at a replay of the incident. And equally, the on-field referee can simply ignore VAR. So these are the possible scenarios. And of course, when it comes to the on-field review, that can either lead to an overturn or the decision being upheld. I've covered this already in the discussion. All that's worth saying there is that there's a few of the studies. So favoritism under social pressure, the injury time study was Gaetano et al. In 2005. There are studies on conscious and unconscious biases by referees listed here, including some of the authors are on the call, such as Tunde Raimo and co-authors looking at conscious bias of officials. And then there's a mention of the home advantage. So again, going back to match outcomes, the home advantage may well be one of the outcomes that is affected by VAR because it affects referee decisions and therefore it affects outcomes. If we assume that, well, the obvious thing that referee decisions can affect match outcomes. In terms of studies that looked at VAR, as I mentioned, there's quite a lot of football matches now taking place with VAR, so perhaps as might be anticipated, there have been studies on the impact of VAR. We found a few of them and looked at a few of them. There's Guy et al. From last year looking at Italy and Germany before and after VAR was introduced. Then they find, using the data that they have, that first half play was slowed down and there were fewer fouls committed in the second half under VAR. They found that offsides, penalties and yellow cards were all lower once VAR had been implemented. A different paper by Spitz et al., a very thorough study employing referees to determine the accuracy or otherwise of decisions, looking at 13 countries in which VAR was introduced between 2016 and 2018. One of the things that we have is quite a significant source of data, so we can look at different countries. We limit ourselves in this work to just what we call the big five leagues, so England, Germany, Spain, France, and Italy. But equally, there are more countries in which VAR has been introduced in recent years. What Spitz et al. Find is that accuracy of decisions has gone up from 92% without VAR to 98% once VAR has been applied. So they're looking at games where VAR already exists and is already being used, and so the decision prior to VAR's intervention and the decision afterwards, and they find an increase in accuracy. Because we don't have a team of referees that we can employ to work out in each of these cases whether the right decision was being made, we're not able to think about the decision accuracy of referees, but we are able to look at the wealth of data out there that exists when we're thinking about VAR. So what are we using? We're using ESPN's website. ESPN has a vast wealth of match commentaries. So if you go on the website, I'll show you some screenshots in a second. There's a huge amount of information. In fact, I might as well go there now. This is a screenshot of two of the things that the ESPN website offers you for any given match. And this is Arsenal's win over Rapid Vienna last night. You have a timeline. A timeline tells you when goals went in, when yellow cards occurred as well. Usually, if you're on the website and you hover your cursor over FT, and indeed HT as well, it tells you the amount of injury time that was played. You can also see down here is the match commentary itself. This is just a snippet of it, and you can of course click on the full commentary, but you've got a little blurb for each piece of action that took place, including here's the end of the game, here's how much injury time was added. And so that's our main source of data is ESPN commentaries. The other thing to say about them is that there is an additional set of statistics. So fouls, yellow cards, red cards, offsides, corner kicks, saves, possession, and shots on and off target as well. Usually, I guess there was probably 2,000 fans there. Well, there was 2,000 fans there last night. Usually there will be information on the attendance at the game as well. So that's our main source of data, is these commentaries. We also get some subsidiary information from worldfootball.net, which is another fantastic source of data, information on the referees themselves, because obviously if we're thinking about referees, we need to understand a little bit about them, potentially different characteristics that these websites keep hold of. But also if we want to think about how strong teams were and the influence that may have had on outcomes within a match, we want a longer history of data than ESPN has for match day histories, and so we get that via World Football as well. As I mentioned, we're focusing on the big five leagues. We're focusing on the what were the four most recent full seasons before the end of the last season. And we've got data collected on these other countries because these are countries which ESPN has its match day commentary for. So that's an important part of our data collection, is we want to make sure that these are countries that have match day commentary. So you might wonder why the Netherlands isn't there, or other countries that have got a strong footballing presence. Well, for whatever reason, there isn't a match day commentary on the ESPN website for these leagues. So past the screenshots. When we take all of those match day commentaries with perhaps 100 snippets per match across all these countries in these years, we get the following number of observations for commentary items. The first thing that strikes you, might be the first thing that struck me with frustration, was that we've got a problem with the most recent year collection in Spain. So that has to be fixed at some point after this talk. But you can see that we end up with quite a lot of observations. I mean, there's 380 matches in England, so there's 389,000. So there is about 100 or so, maybe a touch less, commentary items per match. You can see we stopped before the COVID lockdown in 2019, 2020. So we don't have a full season for 2019, 2020. This is what we've got in terms of VAR incidents per season, and my hunch is that this is probably a little bit on the low side. So one of the jobs is to extract from these commentaries when a VAR incident took place, and also not to double count the VAR incident as well, because in the matchday commentary it may well say VAR check, VAR review, and then the next item is VAR review complete, decision overturned or decision upheld. And so there's quite a bit of a job there in terms of not double counting, but getting the right a number of incidents. But you can see here that we've got 329 incidents in 2019-20 in England, so just over one a match on that basis. Then we've got fewer generally per season with the across the other leagues that where VAR was implemented earlier. You see Germany and Italy first up in 2017-18. Spain and France in 2018-19. I suspect there was probably a trial match where a review took place in France in the previous season, and then there may well have been a similar event in England as well, hence the one review that appears to be there in 2018-19. So that's VAR incidents by season. And in terms of what our methodology is, I've already, roughly speaking, talked through it. It's said you to look at the impact of VAR existing on referee decisions and on other measured outcomes, and from that to try and infer what that may mean for player actions, player decisions, and again, referee actions and decisions. And we're able to use a little bit of information from Germany, also to think a little bit about the reception of fans to VAR as well. In terms of the measured outcomes, you saw them already on the ESPN website. It's things like goals, shots on off target, corners, saves, possessions, cards, be they first yellow, second yellow, red, fouls, and offsides. There's an important distinction that we decided fairly early on that we had to make when thinking about VAR, and that is that there were matches when VAR was eligible to be used. It could be used to review a decision. And that is, of course, any match in any of these seasons once it's been implemented in a given country. The technology is in place, the screen is by the side of the pitch, and the VAR team is outside the stadium somewhere. Those are matches where VAR is eligible to be used. It could be used at any point to check a decision. But we also felt it was probably important to then distinguish those kinds of matches from VAR active matches. So that is matches where VAR is actually used. Because while we can say, oh look, VAR was in place in these seasons, we've got this commentary data from ESPN which tells us the matches in which VAR was actually used. And so what we could do there is we could count up, say, the number of VAR incidents in a match and look at the impact of that on measured outcomes. If we do that, and we use something like equation 1 down here, some kind of match outcome, YIT for team I in match T, say, whether VAR was eligible or not, and whether the number of VAR incidents plus a set of controls, well, you can probably immediately start to see the problem here in terms of endogeneity. The number of red cards may well be correlated with the number of times VAR was used, because VAR was used to send off a player, for example, or to overturn a red card decision, perhaps. So what we also use is we exploit that minute by minute variation that we've got in there as well. So we've got what's happening on a minute by minute basis, whether a foul occurred, whether a yellow card was given, whether a goal occurred, whether an offside occurred as well. And so we can use that minute by minute data to say, well, at this point we know there hadn't been any VAR reviews, but then at this point we know that there had been 1 or 2 VAR reviews by that point. So we use that to think about cumulative incidents prior to minute M in a match. And so we also look a little bit later at minute by minute analysis to try and understand what's going on, which all sounds really exciting, but it also adds a heck of a lot to the amount of data to be looked at and size of tables and results to try and make some sense of. So this is very much a work in progress, and keen to get comments as and when we get to the results. So I mentioned this fan reception aspect, and this is quite interesting because in Germany, there's a website, kicker.de, which records a lot of information about matches. It rates players, but it also rates the referees and gives a match report as well. So we have there a consistent set of match reports from a particular source over a long period of time that's easily collectible. So we collected those and we looked at those match reports to ask, well, what was the tone? What was the sentiment? How subjective or objective were these match reports? And what was the impact of VAR and VAR incidents on the nature of these match reports? Because if we presume that the media, tries to sell its content, it's going to want to appeal to fans to sell the content to them, and so it's going to want to try and reflect fan feelings, fan perceptions about the match and about therefore VAR. And so what we can do is we can collect, so I'll show you a screenshot, we collect a couple of things from this website. So we collect obviously the match information, but there's also a match review, like basically a match report. My German isn't good enough to know which one of these it is, but nonetheless, this guy here is the referee, Guido Winkmann, in this particular match between Stuttgart and Köln, and he gets a grade of 2. As I understand it, these grades 2 is better than 3, and they go between 1 and 6. So we can collect that, and we can collect the match report. And what do we do with that? Well, we use something called text blob in Python to analyze the sentiment, to analyze the polarity, so whether it was positive or negative as a match report, and also how subjective versus how objective that match report was. And so we collect the polarity. There's the polarity of these kicker reports over time. You can see that there's a fair amount of consistency over the seasons. These are, say, the 4 seasons that we have the data for. Here's the level of subjectivity, another blob of points, but you get some sense of the nature of these ways of scoring these match reports. And finally, as I said, they report referee ratings as well. And they say they're between 1 and 6. Not many referees get 1, and also not very many get 6 as well. By and large, the majority do actually get about 2. Some get 2.5 and 3, and so on. So that's fan reception, because fan reception is surely just as important as other measured outcomes, because the fans are those who express their willingness to pay, and it's the demand from fans that justifies the existence of the game. So while we can look at particular aspects of outcomes and measure them very accurately, what matters to some extent arguably is what the fan perceives. So first table with a lot of numbers, hopefully it's reasonably visible. These are our variables, dependent variables that we use. I don't actually try and explain the number of VAR incidents because essentially that's not particularly predictable. But nonetheless, you've got some idea here, the number of VAR incidents, those in the first half, those in the second half. Why split between first half and second half? Well, that's one way to potentially get a bit of a handle on, without going to the minute by minute level, whether the timing of VAR incidents affected how things turned out in the match. It may be that if there's lots more first half incidents, VAR incidents, maybe we get a bit of a better sense of the impact of VAR on full-time match outcomes than second half VAR incidents, for example. But I'm looking here at the sample, splitting it between the pre-VAR era and the post-VAR era. I'm going to have to again check the differences, some of the slightly perplexing differences in the number of observations, such as the injury time in the second half. But we've got the mean amount of injury time, say, given in the pre-VAR era of 2 minutes in the first half and 2.3 minutes in the first half with VAR, 4.4 minutes without VAR, and 4.5 minutes with VAR. And by and large, there are differences observed in the pre and post VAR era. Just looking at the summary statistics, fewer offsides, so 2.3 to 2 against the away side, 2 to 1.8. And then we've got goals as well. Not much of an impact on goals, plus potentially slightly more goals by the away side, perhaps hinting at this levelling up effect by helping referees to make decisions that aren't necessarily subconsciously biased. Impact on fouls, slightly fewer. Hard to know whether that's significant. Impact on yellows, not any huge impact on yellow cards. Slight falls. Red cards, corners. Saves, possession. We might not obviously think, well, why would possession necessarily matter? But possession may be quite a good indicator of the balance of play and how the balance of players been influenced. And you can see there's this tiny decrease in the VAR era relative to the pre-VAR era in home possession, and a tiny increase in away possession. Shots, more shots in the VAR era by both home and away teams, more off target, and slightly more on target. So those are the summary stats. In general, we've got a bunch of control variables which include referee characteristics. How old is the referee? Control for obviously the season and the number of people that were at the stadium, because this is the era when fans went to stadiums. How well matched the teams were. We use ELO ratings for that. And again, I use that long history that we can get from the World Football website to get a arguably more accurate sense of how strong a team is via these ELO ratings. And there's just some summary stats there which aren't necessarily particularly illuminating. So the first question, and the text is beginning to get smaller. First question might be, well, first referee decision that we can quite fairly easily identify is the amount of injury time awarded. And this is something that we can presume is something done in consultation between the official on the field and the fourth official who puts up a board saying how much injury time there's going to be. So we've got injury time awarded at half-time. So before the game breaks for half-time, there'll be some amount of injury time awarded. And then there's injury time given at full-time. And for those who are unfamiliar with what injury time is, the clock doesn't stop in football. And so as a result, it carries on even if the game is stopped. Referees take note of the stoppages and then they add time at the end for stoppages, be they deliberate stoppages to waste time or be they legitimate stoppages. And so in here we've included legitimate reasons why there'd be a delay. For example, there may be goals. So the more goals there are, the more injury time you might expect because play stops, players celebrate and so on. For what it's worth, total number of goals is insignificant for first half injury time and even ever so slightly negatively significant for full-time injury time, perhaps surprisingly. But we do also have the number of goals. We have the goal difference, sorry, that's what we have. So we're also interested in goal difference in terms of whether one team was ahead, one team was behind, and also substitutions. So a team will make a change, one player will trudge off the pitch, another one will come on, and that will waste time. In the first half, a substitution in the first half adds on a significant amount of injury time, up to about a minute per change. But in the second half, this isn't the case, actually. Substitutions in total don't actually have any positive effect on second half injury time. And this may reflect the fact that first half injuries, changes in the first half may well relate to injuries. There may be time for treatment for players, but whereas in the second half, they're much more tactical changes where things may happen relatively more quickly. The main result in relation to VAR, so we get something that hints at the Garicano injury time result, but I think it's a very minimal difference. We look here at the impact of goal difference being 1, so the home team is ahead. goal difference being 0, it's a level match, and goal difference being -1. The goal team, the home team is 1 behind. If the home team is 1 behind, a slightly larger coefficient, but I'm not convinced that that's necessarily statistically different one from the other. We've got goal difference, and goal difference is actually positive, so you're ahead. That seems to suggest slightly more injury time. But VAR, what happens if you have a VAR incident in the first half? There's about 0.8 of a minute added. If there's a VAR incident in the second half, about 1.25 minutes are added. By and large, it appears to be accepted, so the Spitz et al. Paper has some stats on how long the stoppages take, and by and large, it appears to be round about a minute. So this appears to suggest that second half, there's about the right amount of compensation for a VAR stoppage. But a VAR stoppage in the first half, not necessarily, only about 0.8 of a minute of time got back. So fans, again, the fan experience, fans are potentially losing out on match time via these VAR incidents taking place. There's no effect of attendance either. So again, this is somewhat contrary. There's no effect when it's interacted with goal difference, but this is, as I say, there's some evidence of support for the Garicano result from 2005. And another decision that we can potentially argue is a referee decision, or a linesman decision, actually, is offside. So again, historically, a linesman would run the line and try and work out if a player, and the offside rule is complicated if you're not familiar with it, if a player was beyond the last defender when the ball was kicked. It's a very difficult thing to be able to do. A lot of judgment calls to be made, and so one of the arguments for VAR was to be able to improve on offside calls. So then we could look at offside calls and look at the impact of them. And so here we've got offsides for the given against the home side, and offsides given against the away side on the second column. We can, as mentioned, consider whether VAR was eligible. Could it have been used? So we've got VAR eligible, the seasons it was eligible to be used, and we see that there's a significant decrease in the number of offsides being called in those seasons. Now, I haven't mentioned fixed effects included. We've included fixed effects for the season, so this is on top of any kind of secular trends and patterns that we might observe in offsides being called. A big decrease in offsides being called in the seasons when VAR is eligible. And certainly in the case of for the home side, that continues even further in the second season that VAR is eligible. We include extra effects if there's a second season type effect. Not a similar magnitude, but not significant for away offsides. But well, what about the number of actual VAR incidents? You can see that actually it somewhat works the other way. We've split these in terms of first half and second half incidents. No effect of a first half VAR incident on offsides, but second half VAR incidents, and we do see an increase in the number of offsides, and the same true for away offsides with a first half reduction. So that's offsides. So clearly some impact here of VAR being eligible and VAR being active, but concerns about the endogenous nature of the measurement here. We can expand to a range of other types of outcomes: goals, shots on target, shots off target, corners, and fouls. And again, you're probably all craning to get close to the screen to try and see what these numbers look like. Again, similar format to the table. VAR eligible, second season that VAR was eligible, the number of VAR incidents in the first half, and the number that then took place in the second half. So we have what appears to be fewer goals in the seasons that VAR was eligible, significant for the home team, not significant for the away team. And then, again, somewhat similar, we find that if there are more VAR incidents, there are more goals. And again, this could simply be VAR incidents associated with goals. There's a VAR check or review after there's a VAR check. Shots on target, negative effect for the seasons that are eligible, and no obvious effect here. Shots off target, more wayward shots, positive but insignificant of VAR being eligible. But then when there are VAR incidents, there appears to be potentially a slightly negative impact. And again, concerns about endogeneity. Not many stars further along, but at least negative signs for fouls, for example, in the seasons when VAR is eligible, for what that's worth. a few other variables, red cards, yellow cards, which we may infer to be referee variables. Of course, they're not, because these are responses to player actions. And so again, here we've got generally negative signs for when VAR has been in place, but then also positive for when there are VAR incidents. Sorry? No, obviously that wasn't a question for me. Please do interrupt if you do want to. We've got a number of VAR incidents in the first half is positively associated, and significantly so, and indeed slightly less so, with VAR incidents in the second half with red cards. Again, could well be the VAR reviews and red cards. So to move towards the end of this and to present yet more data, we might want to think therefore about a minute-by-minute analysis, because at least with a minute-by-minute analysis we can count how many VAR reviews there's been so far. How are VAR reviews distributed throughout the match? Perhaps as has been observed in many other types of situations, many of the reviews take place in the elastic minutes, which are the 45th and the 90th minutes, because these are long minutes. You might think they're 60 seconds, but actually they're much longer, because an event takes place in the 93rd minute, but it's usually reported as taking place in the 90th minute. I can tidy that up a little bit by looking at the actual commentary time. And that's something that will be expanding to do. So this isn't quite such a big bulge here, but you can imagine that if we've got something occurring at 45 plus 3, and there's a VAR at 45 plus 1, we are still then getting that the action happened after the VAR review. So we can look at these and be warned. These are very, very small font, so you probably just want to rely on what I say at this stage. These are regressions of, first column, the number of yellow cards given yellow cards per minute, essentially. So a whole lot of zeros and some ones. We've got to scale by the minute, because to go back to here, we've got a generally increasing pattern of yellow cards per minute, up to 0.004 yellow cards per minute towards the end. You can see we are starting to move into unconventional data sources when we're thinking about yellow cards, red cards, etc. per minute, but we do need to scale for the fact that yellow cards are increasing every minute of the match in terms of their expected frequency. When we do that, we can think, well, what's the effect of cumulative VAR reviews so far? And that's this row here that you can't see, but those are positive but insignificant coefficients. First column, yellows in total. Second and third column are for the home team and for the away team. We can also look at whether the VAR resulted in an overturn of the original decision. You can imagine that players might be more angry if a VAR decision goes against them. They scored a goal that they think is legitimate, and the review happens and it overturns the goal, disallows it. But that doesn't appear to have any extra effect. Again, insignificant, slightly negative. We can then look at we can split that out for team 1 and team 2 though. So middle column here is yellows given total reviews involving the home team, overturn reviews involving the home team. So slightly negative actually, but insignificant. VAR reviews involving the away team, slightly significant for home player yellows, and there's a corresponding effect, but negative. If there's an overturn review against the away team, there are slightly fewer yellow cards against the away team. So that's a sense that we can then dig a little bit deeper at the timing of when these reviews took place. We can also look at how long it's been since the decision took place, and we can generally find, at least in the case of yellow cards, actually most things are fairly insignificant. We can look at yellow cards, red cards, fouls, for example. This is what fouls per minute look like. Fouls are remarkably consistent throughout the match, at least according to the ESPN match day commentaries, again with this falling after the 90th minute. And so in terms of the regression, small font again, but we've got cumulative VAR reviews in this section here, potentially small effects. So cumulative VAR reviews involving the home team, a slight positive effect on fouls by the away team. So there we go. A huge amount of results, which it's actually fairly hard, as you can probably imagine, to necessarily cut through and really understand what's going on. I've got a few more stars when it comes to shots on target. So there's a little bit more action when it comes to shots on target. But by and large, these give us a way of getting at potential impact of VAR on decisions in real time, almost in real time as they occur during the match. I want to wrap up by returning back to the fan response or the fan reaction to VAR analysis that we're able to do. So these are results based on this sentiment analysis, the polarity, positive, negative, and the subjectivity, objectivity of match reports. Number of VAR reviews here, where we do control, we have fixed effects for the season and for the teams involved as well. We've got that there's no significant effect here. There is a slight negative effect, so that suggests that reports get a little bit more negative the more VAR reviews there are, but that's not a significant effect. There's a slight effect of the total number of goals and the attendance on the subjectivity of match reports for what that's worth. What's quite interesting is this referee grade. So this referee score that referees are assigned by this website, by reporters as they write their match report. Well, that appears to be impacted by the number of VAR reviews. So each VAR review that takes place appears to add 0.2 to that grade. So therefore, five reviews takes a referee from a 2 to a 3 and appears to be getting a worse grade as a result of VAR. And perhaps that's therefore a reflection of how fans respond and therefore journalists respond in their writing and reviewing of VAR. But there certainly appears to be something of the negative reaction of fans reflected in these sentiment results. So to wrap up, this is a evaluation of the VAR review system in football, technology used to assist in decision making. And we're able to therefore think about the impacts that there may be on decisions, potential biases that have been observed in the literature in the past. We've been able to look at injury time. There's a possibility that referees aren't necessarily passing on the full delay caused by VAR on football matches. There's also we've also looked at the offside calls as well. There appears to be fewer. If we look at the aggregate level, VAR is in existence, therefore there are fewer calls, but there are more complicated effects when it comes down to looking at the impact of in-game VAR calls on them, what subsequently happens. So what we'd say in conclusion at this point is that the impact of VAR appears complex when it comes to the eligibility versus the active nature of it. There appears to be some positive effects on outcomes, such as goals and potentially matching up of the teams, mitigating some of that home advantage, but there's certainly more to do. And in terms of the fan reception, nothing significant comes out, although the direction is what you might expect for the writing of match reviews when it comes to football matches, and there's certainly a significant effect when it comes to referees getting poorer scores when there have been more VAR reviews in matches. So what I'm going to do is I am going to stop there, and I'm going to take my screen off full. I hope, there we go, and return to hopefully take any questions that there are. Okay, Alex is the only question, which is there any reason to assume that age will behave in such a shape? That's interesting.
If you go, James, if you go back to one of the regressions with,
yep, I was going to say which table is that based on?
Yeah, age and age squared. It was I think injury time.
Injury time. Okay. So this one. Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, there's no. I don't think there's any obvious reason to expect it. You know, this is one of the things that we put in there, just in terms of, well, there might be a referee experience, age effect. To some extent, that's a variable being thrown in because we have it rather than there being any theoretical justification. I calculated the turning point for a different set of decisions earlier on and got the age of 50. So, there's certainly some, there's potentially something there, but whether it's what we think it necessarily is, it could just be that it's capturing a different effect completely.
Although you can always claim it's not significant, so there's no
Exactly. Thanks, Alex. I can see a hand is Juan de Diaz.
Hello, James. Good afternoon.
Hi, how you doing?
Well, very interesting presentation. Just a quick question because, I am a co-author of you in another paper, and I was thinking if the two papers are somehow related, because if you have in mind the concept of referee bias is something that is unconscious in the referee, so something that the referee is a mistake of the referee. But what we do in the paper we have together is trying to estimate the objective function of the referee. So in this case, the referee doesn't make a mistake, but just react according to this objective function. And I was wondering if some of these bias that has not been mitigated, have not been eliminated with VAR, could be due to the presence of this objective function that is still present.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. Yes, that's a really good point. We're just assuming that the assignment of referees to the games is essentially random. But as I say in the paper that we've written, we're looking at the allocation system of referees in Spain to matches. Absolutely, there has to be a question there regarding equally, and also as we do in that paper, not just the allocation of referees, but how referees then make decisions considering their future assignment to matches, whether their decisions affect whether they're going to be assigned in the future or not. So absolutely, that's a really good point. Thank you. I mean, to answer it, we can't do anything with that. We just assume that it's random, the assignment of referees. So.
Well, is a little bit different, the question. So the point is that it's not the same paper, it's very different, but the point is that just to assume that referees have some incentives to make decisions. Yeah. So even if they have all the possibilities to make the right decision, given that they are incentivized, they have an objective function that incentivizes that to make some decision, they can do that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Juan Diaz. Very good point. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Is there any heterogeneity between the leagues? Have you checked it?
Haven't looked in any detail. I mean, what we've just done is put in the fixed effects for different countries. I don't know. I know that Giuseppe, he's one of the arguments that he's made is that simulation has essentially been eradicated, certainly in his perception of football in Italy. I'm not totally sure that that's the case in England, but I don't actually watch enough Premier League football to be able to make a judgment. Simple answer is no. There must be a variation, although even that said, I've not checked the fixed effects estimates that we've got. But instinct says that there is variation, and that's something that we have to be mindful of. Any more questions, comments? Which means I must have got off very lightly then. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for coming along to this session and contributing. We are going to have, I'm going to unshare my my slides, and I'm going to now try and share the big reveal for next week's Rose's talk. Question is whether I can find the poster. Next week we have a slightly different talk. We have Roger Titford, who's going to be talking. He's going to be talking on. No, I'm not going to be able to find the poster, so I'll go and find the title for Roger's talk somewhere else. Roger's talk is going to be on English football's first boom between 1872 and 1914 and its 21st century parallels. So Roger's a historian by nature, and so please do join us same time next week for an economic history talk. Thanks very much for your time. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.